But she's part of our coffee family, like we all serve coffee, and so we help each other out. So I've thrown my speech out and I'm going to try not to waffle as I usually do, and I just thought I'd say a few words. It's a bit weird to be kind of making a speech at my own book launch because normally you ask someone else to do it, but I didn't want to put that on anyone. So Meshi was, it's turned out to be a bit different from what I thought it would be, because when Martin from Affirm Press rang me in August 2020, so just a few months after the Things She Owned came out, and he said, so Katherine, what have you got for me now? And I'd had this idea of a very simple, easy, and I actually used the word easy to him. I said, I've just got this easy idea, really light, a few funny stories from my family about food, and then a few recipes here and there, and it could be really easy, I'll just toss it off. So I signed this contract promising to write this thing in some absolutely ludicrous short time. And any writer who asked me, so when are you getting this book published? And I'd say, October. And they go, so good, you've got a year and a bit then. I'm like, no, this October. And their faces were like, and that told me I'd made a terrible mistake. And I pushed the extension and pushed the extension, and finally it's out yesterday. And the reason why it became so difficult was, as I started to write, and I think all of you writers here, any artists actually, anybody who, there are some amazing artists in here that whose media is other than words, who will understand that when you go through your creative practice, you're often digging in places that you don't realize have been buried. And I had no idea of some of the memories that started coming up as I started to write that I'd packed away where they were not too troublesome. And most of them were to do with disconnection from my native country, because I grew up a Japanese kid, really, until I was 5. I didn't learn English until I was at kindergarten, and I was surrounded by my Japanese family, and I felt like a Japanese kid, to the point that, if I caught my reflection in a mirror, I'd sort of be a bit shocked at how different I looked from how I felt inside. So the amputation with the culture was a bit unexpected. I didn't know it would be kind of forever. And I can't ever be a citizen of my own country because I'm not registered, because I'm mixed race, as the law was back then. It's a little bit different now. So as I was writing Meshi and thinking I'm going to write these funny stories, all these memories came out of what it felt like to be kind of amputated from my culture. And I think lots of people will understand what that feels like. And so, it was just difficult to get those words out. And a lot of people who were here saw me through, helped me keep going. I would name them all, but it would take forever and I'll probably start crying. So I just want to thank everyone who has seen me along the way. Some really important people who got me off, started off with my writing career. Sue Hosking, my PhD supervisor at University of Adelaide, who's come all the way from Blair, and Carol Lefebvre, who was also one of my supervisors, who just taught me so much about the craft of writing, and whose writing is just so beautiful. And there are many extraordinary writers here with me. Alison Flett, Rachel Mead. I feel terrible if I've missed anyone. Gina Chatterton, who's a graphic artist, got a book coming out. It's a graphic, what do you like to call it? I don't want to call it a comic. It's a comic. So many talented people here. And oh gosh, Lou, Omar, all these people who've got books coming out soon. So I'm going to stop because there's going to be a lot, I could go on about the amazing talents of my fellow writers here. Anyhow, thank you all for coming. I just want to say we're standing right here in the water that flows through Yertapulti, and it was the summer camping grounds of the Ghana people. And it still holds enormous spiritual significance from the connection to land. And I just think, as I stand here, of the timelessness of, as Nadi Simpson said 2 years ago at Writers' Week, when she was talking about the spirits of the ancestors being all around and ever present, and there's no time. There's no, it's a timeless, ever-present presence of these spirits and ancestors who are with us. And as I stand here talking about Meshi, think of my ancestors. And not just my mother, my two beloved uncles, my grandmother, who all died much too young, but also the thousands upon thousands of ancestors that survived. I did a DNA test, and my maternal line comes from East Africa, and her people were nomadic, wandered northwards, and then split apart, east and west, and the people who went west went to the Americas, and then the other half went to Asia, went through China, what's now modern China, Korea. We have some Korean friends here too, through Japan, and then there was me. And all of us have got these thousands and thousands and thousands of nameless ancestors who had to survive all these terrible plagues and pestilences and wars for us to exist. And I think, despite our trials and tribulations in life, it's just quite a miracle that we're all here. So I've come a long way from talking about a book about food, but food in Japan is really profound. It's linked very closely to the seasons, and there's a whole kind of sacredness about it that comes from the divinity of rice. And I won't go on too long because it's in here, but Japan really was created from rice. The myth is that the great sun goddess, one of the greatest Shinto deities, created the 7,000, did you know, islands of Japan. Only 460 or so are inhabited. And then she bestowed the first rice grains on Jimmu, who was the first emperor of Japan and said to be her descendant, and from which, until the Second World War, all subsequent emperors were said to have descended. Slightly controversial issue. But rice really formed the whole societal structure, because to grow rice you need hundreds of people working to put these tiny fresh green shoots into the water in the mud, because they only last a day. So the whole village would turn out and they'd sing songs and plant the shoots, and everybody worked together. And Japan is very much a society that's based on group and community, and that comes first, and then there's the individual. So it's a very different way of thinking and being, I think. And the way language is processed is very different, because it's an ideogrammic language. It's not like a Roman alphabet like ours. So there are lots of differences, and I've always tried to figure out how to reconcile these incredibly opposing parts of myself. And there are a few other, in fact, 4 people here actually, who share this sort of mixed Japanese and Canadian, Scottish, and Noriko, who you'll see shortly, her son too. And it's an interesting thing to navigate, of being both. So I've waffled on long enough. I think I just want to talk again about the spirits. So I really want to acknowledge my mother Akiko, my grandmother Yachio, my uncle Yuichi, who I nicknamed Oki Oji-chan, which means big uncle. And that was because he was the older of the 2 uncles, and he was also really tall, and he was big. So that was Oki Oji-chan. And then my dear uncle Ryoji, who I remember really well, who died when he was 28 very suddenly, and I was 6, I think, and I still remember him very clearly. So I just wanted to carry the memory of them in the book. So, spirits, I was just thinking too how incredibly different Ghana culture is from Japanese culture, and yet there is this similarity of this idea that spirits and ancestors coexist with us in an unseen realm. So we have this physical realm, but they're always ever present, and it's this cognitive dissonance. Logically know that Ryoji isn't sort of watching over me, or that the spirit and Sato are around us, but it's just a part of life. And it's celebrated too. In June and July, there's the Obon Festival, the Festival of the Dead, kind of a few parallels with the Mexican festival. Bonfires are lit so that the spirits of the ancestors and loved ones who've passed can return home to spend time with the living. And then there's a huge celebration with dancing and food, eating, lots of eating, street food, yatai, and then there's dancing and there's singing. But it's not just ancestral spirits, it's also god deity spirits too that dwell in nature. They're also everywhere, and there are also, they're not always benign, these spirits. They're the ones that people would pray to in the hope that another huge earthquake wouldn't come. You know, there are about 5,000 tremors a year in Japan. Some are very small, some are a bit larger, but it's unpredictable. So there's always this uncertainty. Every year in September, there's a huge typhoon season that comes, and rain can destroy the rice that help, you know, it's about survival. And so it seems really clear to me why people worshipped gods in nature, because there was no other way of controlling things, and it was a way of feeling a bit safer. There are very not benign spirits too, and they're known as yokai, and anyone who's interested in anime might be familiar with the word, and they're the really quite bizarre and frightening monsters. Some of them are divine. If you've ever watched Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away, those are spirit deities, and they're not always benign. I love that film. If you've not seen it, please, it's just extraordinary. It's called Spirited Away, but the Japanese title is Sen to Chihiro no Kamikakushi, which means Sen and Chihiro's hidden spirit world. And you'll see in it that she enters into a realm beyond what exists here. And a lot of them are not benign. There's one particular spirit, though, that I really want to talk about, and it's connected to who you're going to be seeing shortly. There's a character of a female demon that's played in Noh plays, traditional Noh plays. And the female demon is a very powerful and frightening demon. She's got horns, and she is here to wreak vengeance for the injustices and the suffering that she has endured in her life. She's extremely powerful and really quite a frightening figure. But she also represents wisdom that's gained from learning through suffering. She talks of the wounds to her heart.
自らまいた種は自ら刈り取る。これぞ世の習わし。己の犯した過ち。冥土の土産となりにけり。
Yeah, first of all, congratulations, Kat. It's wonderful your book launch, and I am so honored to be here to be part of it. And to see your all nice friends to support you, it's wonderful. So I hope you enjoyed my music, which is connected with the Kat so much. That's Japanese instruments, Japanese tune, and so on. So I'd like to sing one song, which is I composed the tune and I took the lyric from the Manyoshu, which is the you will explain maybe later, which is in the Meshi book as well. And it's 7th century. There are lots of poetry collection, and I picked this one particularly, a boyfriend and girlfriend exchange, and really love song, nice, lovely, but sort of kind of erotic, which is the boyfriend says, I was waiting for you in a dark forest. I waited for you so long, but you didn't come. The dew of the air was all over my body. And then so he sent the letter to his girlfriend, and she wrote back to him, oh my darling, I'm sorry I couldn't come, but I wish I could be the dew which was all over your body. So yeah, it's nice tune, and I put the nice lyrics. I put the tune this one.
back in the Heian era, around the 8th century, there were some prolific female writers. You will all have heard of the Pillow Book. One of the most famous female poets from the time was Izumi Shikibu, and she wrote this beautiful poem. A lot of the poems were, I think there was a lot of bed hopping or futon hopping, in the imperial court amongst noble men and women of the Heian era. But this one is about the moon, which is what Noriko just sang about. It's very short. Watching the moon at dawn, solitary mid-sky. I knew myself completely, no part left out. And that speaks to me a lot, apart from it being evocative of the landscapes of home. Because writing Meshi, I think, unearthed parts of myself that I didn't realise were hidden for so long. And, it was an unsettling but necessary process of reintegration. And all I think is that in exile, if we're away from where we were born, whether it's within South Australia, somewhere else, or overseas, or in a different hemisphere, we still long for those lost places. We still carry them with us. So the Manyushu, I basically referred to them a little bit in the book because the whole thing is laid out according to the year, the calendar. So it's the ancient lunar solar calendar of China that was taken and adapted around the same time that Shikibu was writing her poetry. And the year was divided into 24 seki, which are these overarching seasons, and then each seki divided into 3 ko, each of them given really beautiful poetic names, actually named by the court poets of the Heian era. So in this book, where I've got a bit of an introduction, which is entitled Nanigoto ni mo shun ga aru, which means to everything a season. And then the following 24 chapters are each of these seasons. And it's just a bit hybrid, like me. It's a little bit memoir, a little bit essay, a little bit funny anecdotes, some recipes. It's a bit of everything. And I think I am going to read a little bit from here. And I decided, it would make sense to read from the season that we're in now. So that's the season of Seimei, which means pure and clear. And that's from the 5th to the 19th of April. It isn't exact, roughly. And the 3 ko of this particular season are entitled Tsubame Kitaru, which means the swallows return. That's 5th to 9th of April, roughly. Then we have Kogan Kairu, wild geese fly north, 10th to 14th of April. That's where we are now. Niji hajimete arawaru, first rainbows appear, 15th to 19th of April. So we are back to front. It's spring in Japan, which is why I have cherry blossom. And I wrote this chapter while I was in a shack that belongs to Craig, who was here earlier. So I've come to write in solitude in a small shack owned by friends on the edge of the sea in South Australia. It's a wild, solitary spot along a remote stretch of the coastline of Guranga, renamed by English settlers as the York Peninsula. These are the lands of the Narunga Nation, of the nomadic Dilba clan, one of 4 on the peninsula, who were intimate with every element of the environment. I think of how much they must have loved this particular place, alive with their stories, spirits, and ancestors, a landscape with which they're timelessly entwined, though they no longer live along this particular stretch of coastline. During my breaks, I step outside to watch the changing moods of sea and sky and the comings and goings of birds, some of them familiar from the British coastline: oyster catchers, terns, lapwings, shearwaters, cormorants. Tiny fairy wrens of startling blue, a gathering of raucous peach-breasted galahs, and 2 huge pelicans flying slow and low over my head like aircraft carriers one afternoon with a loud swoosh, swoosh, remind me I'm in Australia. Swallows flash past at impossible speeds with their rose-blush breasts, blue-sheen feathers and go-faster tails, zigzagging low to catch insects that flit up from the mounds of seagrass. Their arrival is a sign of coming spring here, too, The swallow is one of 66 bird species listed in the Japan-Australia Migratory Birds Agreement, a treaty that ensures their safe migration between the two countries. I marvel at how such small birds are able to fly enormous distances to touch the shores of countries where I've left parts of myself behind. I've brought provisions to sustain me: rice, salt-cured fillets of salmon, ramen, shiso pickles, and pantry ingredients like shoyu, nori, miso, dashi, and cooking sake. I've even brought natto, the slimy, pungent, fermented soybeans beloved in Japan, but which few non-Japanese can tolerate. Usually eaten at breakfast, natto's bursting with probiotics, good for gut health, like so many other Japanese foods, and rich with protein, and it's my comfort food. I dollop some on fresh steamed rice mixed with egg, shoyu, and finely chopped spring onion for lunch, and wonder if anyone has ever eaten natto in this spot before. Wonder how many Japanese people might have visited this isolated stretch of coastline. I was weaned on soft-boiled udon noodles, okayu rice porridge, and spoonfuls of nourishing, silvery, semi-dried shirasu, the tiny fry of sardines, which my mother rinsed with hot water to soften and warm and to wash off the salt. She was a discerning cook and prepared food with a fierce, ritualistic focus. Like the rest of her family, she had a refined palate and knew what good food meant. The family shop in the belly of Tokyo beside a busy road has a good reputation. Until the early 70s, the shopfront was on the ground floor of a traditional two-story wooden family home with tatami mat floors. Its weathered wood and glass doors slid open with a comforting rattle I still remember. Gara gara gara. There's a black and white photo of my 6-year-old self standing in front of them, sucking on an old-fashioned kurasato black sugar lollipop given to me by the wizened old man beside me in exchange for a few coins. I have this photo on my phone if anyone would like to see. He's a wandering musician with a long white wispy beard and a biwa, a Japanese lute, slung around his neck by its strap along with a sign promising songs and sweets for money. My mother says my grandfather, Ryuichi, never allowed those sliding doors to be closed during opening hours, even when it was freezing outside. Customers shouldn't have to trouble themselves, he'd say. Okyakusama wa kami-sama. The customer is a god. I wonder if he knew his mischievous sons made up cheeky names for some of their regulars. Ever the prankster, my Oki Oji-chan once called quietly to my mother as she sat in the shop's back kitchen. What's the round-bellied animal that Osho-san fights with at Shojoji Temple? And she'd yell, "Tanuki!" as loudly as she could, not realizing that the customer who'd earned that nickname from her brothers was in the shop, a man with an uncanny resemblance to the Japanese raccoon dog, traditionally depicted as a pot-bellied, sake-guzzling, scavenging mischief maker. I never knew my grandfather. He died before my mother and father met. I have a sepia photograph of him dressed in a dapper suit with a waistcoat, tie, and trilby hat. I also have this photo on my phone. My grandmother, Yachio, who came from the south and was beautiful, would have taken the picture. He stands with one hand in his pocket, looking debonair and confident, head cocked to one side. His mouth is solemn, but I see smiling eyes behind his round metal-rimmed spectacles. He's unusually tall for a Japanese man, especially for a time when people didn't eat much meat. Like him, I'm tall and short-sighted. I recognize his features from that photograph whenever I look in the mirror. My mother told me my grandfather would never have allowed her to marry a foreigner. I fretted at how close I came to not existing, at how I owed my life to his death. She told me what a tough disciplinarian he was when she was growing up, cold and sometimes cruel. Would Oji-chan have hated me then? I'd asked her. No, she'd say, he'd have adored you just as much as your fully Japanese cousins. My grandparents had 2 sons and 2 daughters. My grandfather named my uncle the first son, and my mother the youngest daughter, after the shop. The shop is called Ariake, after the Ariake Sea off the southern island where my grandmother was born. I was going to draw these so I could hold them up, but I ran out of time. In kanji characters, Ariake is written. It's in the book. Ari means becoming, happen, possess, existence. It symbolizes the Buddhist term bhava, a Sanskrit word that means worldly existence coming into being. And there are multiple verbalizations of this kanji character, as there are for all 50,000 plus kanji. My uncle's name is Yuichi, written Yuichi, meaning one who becomes. And Ake, a single kanji combined from those for sun and moon, means bright, light, wisdom, clarity. My mother's name was Akiko, meaning child of light. And the two kanji combined, Ari and Ake, means dawn, coming of the light. In the early 70s, my uncle had the old Tsukudani shop demolished and built an 8-story building the colour of old bronze with more window than wall. Modern as it was, the kitchen at the back of the shop still had its Shinto kamidana shelf high above the doorway leading through to the shop floor, where offerings of water, rice and citrus fruit were made to Inari Okami, one of the most important Shinto deities. The metal structure of the new building meant it wouldn't burn the way swathes of Tokyo did during the Great Kanto earthquake in 1902 or the napalm bombings in 1945. Its flexible foundations allow it to move with the earth instead of against it when it quakes, which is often. I remember when earthquakes came, the top floor swayed wildly, making my heart hammer with terror, but my uncle always reassured me that it swayed to keep us all safe, that it was this flexibility that stopped the building from collapsing on top of us. My mother and uncle seemed to me like male and female manifestations of the same life force. Out of the 4 siblings, they looked the most alike. Driven by imagination and curiosity, both observed and named the world around them in unusual ways. My mother pointed out small details in the day-to-day that most people miss. A pool of spilled milk that looked like a cow, a dinosaur skeleton in a museum seeming to quiver a little when someone sneezed loudly nearby, fallen cherry blossom petals in the dirt, looking like a map of the world. My mother and my uncle were raconteurs, drawing on a trove of family stories they told again and again, which I found riveting or funny, no matter how often they were repeated. When the two of them got going, I'd sometimes end up rolling around on the tatami floor, clutching my stomach that ached from laughing too hard. I loved it when we sat around Oba-chan's, that's my grandmother's, low table, talking and eating. They made the room feel as though it was filling up with light.
Now I'd like to sing one song which is a festival song. It's called Akita Daikokumai. Akita is my mother's hometown in the northern area of Japan. And Daikoku is one of our 7 gods who Japanese believe. And basically what I'm going to sing is that the Daikoku god came to the village and the whole village people celebrate his visiting. Especially this god, he likes fishing and having party, and yeah, very cheerful, happy god, my favorite god. And so I'd like to sing this one, but in the lyric it says like, in the end I'm gonna shout to sort of chant and pray for everyone here today. And the health-wise it's going well, and your business going well too. So I hope can sell a lot of the book here after my singing this chanting one. So I dedicate it especially to how for the business tonight. And following the song, I'd like to play instrumental tune which is called Tsugaru Jongarabushi, which is very representative of this instrument called Tsugaru Shamisen, and used to be played by blind people who trained the skill of playing this instrument for living. So go around the towns and the houses to play the instrument and get the offering for the day. So it's quite energetic one, and yeah, again I'd like to wish all the best for you, all of you here, and can sell a lot of books tonight.